we find in the world, in our lives, that we do everything to protect ourselves from sorrow, from the negatives in life, and somehow we don't make it. We get hit from somewhere or the other. And this is exactly what Narada, the student in the Chandogya Upanishad, experiences. And he seeks out a sage, the Guru Sanat Kumara. Narada goes to him and says, Narada is a much learned but peaceless individual, like all of us. We have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of wealth, we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of intelligence, but deep within us, somehow that peace eludes us. The difference between us and Narada is that we suffer and complain. Narada did something about it. So he sought Sanat Kumara and went to him and said, I am full of sorrow. In spite of the vast learning, vast areas of knowledge that I have conquered. And I want to overcome this shoka, sorrow. So he approached him in all humility and said, please help me. So Sanat Kumara said, tell me what you know and I'll fill in the gaps. So Narada embarked on an exhaustive list of all the subjects that he had mastered. But in the end he said, I am only a mantravit. Mantravit means I only know words. I am not an atmavit. I don't have knowledge of the self. This is the crucial difference. In the 21st century, in fact, for the last several hundreds of years, the whole world is looking towards gaining knowledge of the world. Knowledge, mantravit, is what we are trying to master. All awards, whether it is the Nobel Prize or what is this recent thing, Economic Times, Businessman of the Year award, this, that and the other, is being awarded to people who are mantravit. Where is the Atmavit, first of all, to award? And unless you have, unless external worldly knowledge is supported by knowledge of the self, you will never achieve anything. You won't even achieve success, forget anything else. This is the crucial lacuna that is filled by the Bhagavad Gita, by Vedanta, which provides this knowledge of the self. And unfortunately, neither are we looking for it, nor is it being supplied. And even when it is supplied, there is very reluctant, pressured approach to the subject. Majority of the people who are here, you ask them, why have you come? No. My neighbor has been pressing me for so long, I decided at least let me come on the second last day. And people during the day, they ring up and say, I'm so sorry, but I have so many other engagements. As if they are doing me a favor by coming. And those who come also, come to analyze, let me see how good this is. Let me see where this is good, where this is bad. That's not the point. Have you come here to rate the Bhagavad Gita or the speaker, or what is it that you've come here for? If each one of us understands that I am sorely lacking, like Narada, in all humility he went, and Narada, mind you, is a sage in his own right. In all humility, if we approach the subject with the understanding that yes, I am a mantravit, I am a knower of words, I am a knower of extraneous subjects, but I am not Atmavit, I don't have this knowledge of the self. This understanding itself leads you to seek, aspire to reach and get it. But each one of us thinks that we are an ustad. I know everything. Not only here, right through our lives, our approach is, I'm right, I know what I'm doing. And I'm in this world only to pass judgment on others. So wherever you go, whatever you do, it's only to assess the proficiency of other people. Very rarely is there a genuine desire to lift oneself out of the sorrow. See, let's face it, every one of us is experiencing sorrow. Every one of us gets hit by something or the other. The only difference is we've got so acclimatized to the sorrow. It's like a person who lives in unhygienic conditions doesn't understand what cleanliness is. Do you know this is one of the major problems in this country? Our country is one of the dirtiest in the world because we have no concept of cleanliness. So we were discussing yesterday with some educationists how to inculcate certain basic values and principles among children, and it was generally agreed that you have to start with cleanliness. Even the elite, the affluent don't have a sense of cleanliness. Forget about the others. So therefore, this insulation from sorrow. See, the Vedantic sages of the Upanishadic Vedic sages understood, they made a basic assessment of the world and understood that the world is undependable. The world is unreliable. The world is a mixture of pairs of opposites. Not only is it a mixture of pairs of opposites, but it is in a constant flux of change. Therefore, they termed it samsara. Samsara means that which comes and goes. In this changing, fluid, unreliable world, how can you expect to attain happiness? How can you expect to keep free of sorrow? Unless you have inbuilt insulation. I believe, I've heard it on TV sometimes. For instance, when the crude oil prices go up, and there are analysts, stock market analysts, they say, oh, this has already been, what is it they say? Discounted. Am I right? That's what you have to do in real life. You have to discount the entire world. Then, whatever happens in the world, your equanimity of mind is untouched. Compared to other animals, when it comes to the mammal has this unique ability to maintain a constant body temperature irrespective of what the atmosphere is. The environment may be freezing cold, it may be very hot. You maintain, all mammals have this unique ability of maintaining the same body temperature. But compared to other mammals, the human being has an additional facility, an additional capability, and that is, irrespective of what happens in the world, you and I have this inherent ability of maintaining the same mental condition. So whether there is profit or loss, joy or sorrow, birth or death, honor or dishonor, you and I have this inbuilt ability of maintaining equanimity, but we are not exercising this. We are not exercising this because we don't have this, we have not developed this inbuilt insulation. And what is this insulation? How do you get this insulation? For instance, when you drive on the roads of Bombay, you agree the roads are full of potholes. It's a question of more or less. Now, when you ride over these potholes, your experience of driving depends upon what? Shock absorbers of the car. So, if it is for instance, if you are riding in an auto rickshaw, you come back with your bones rattling. if you drive in a ordinary car, Maruti, it's okay. To drive in a Mercedes or you see, the higher the grade of the car, the shock absorbers are far more efficient, and therefore what happens is, even though the car takes the jolts, the shock absorbers are placed in such a way that you have a smooth ride over these. This is what you need to develop within yourself when it comes to life. If you try and live life without shock absorbers, you're going to go through sorrow, and this is what Narada experienced. That's what every one of us is experiencing. And we don't even learn the lesson. Once you get hit, at least then you must prepare yourself for the next assault. No, you don't. You go through the sorrow, you pull a long face, you get depressed, and somehow, thank God for that, nature has provided this inherent ability to cure yourself, to heal yourself. So by the time you heal yourself, by the time you get over one attack, something else hits you. And when this goes on continuously, you reach a stage where you're so depressed you never recover. You're constantly in that low. How do you know that? You have to understand what it is to be free from that. Then the weight is lifted from your mind. There is a certain lightheartedness you feel, a certain cheer that you experience, irrespective of what happens around you. This is what you need to develop. So, how do you develop that is the question, for which you need an analysis of your inner personality. What do you consist of? Basically, our personality is sense organs, mind, intellect. These are the three that get hit by the world. The sense organs are called bahya karanas, or external organs, which are in constant touch with the world. They are the ones that get hit first. And these sense objects, when they take in stimuli from the world, these stimuli are blurred and confused information. But it is the mind which collects and collates all these into one cohesive experience. Like just now, you're listening, you're hearing, you're feeling the air conditioning, all kinds of things are going on. But it gets to you as a cohesive experience. This mind, as long as it is tied to the apron strings of the senses, loses its power and becomes extremely limited, becomes a servant of the senses. That's why in the scriptures it's often referred to as Shashti, 5 sense organs, and the 6th. 6th means mind. But when it's released, it's freed from the thraldom of the senses, it acquires a strength, a force that helps it to soar into the subtler realms of your own personality. And the Bhagavad Gita helps you to develop that. Next comes the intellect. This intellect, again, as long as it is tied to the mind and the sense organs, it loses its clarity, it loses its strength, it loses its penetrating ability. But the moment it gets free from the mind and the senses, it has a clarity which helps you right through life. This intellect consists of 2 distinct functions. The same intellect, the same capacity to discriminate. When it operates in the world, it discriminates between pairs of opposites. It's called the gross intellect, which all of us are using. But what you need to develop is the sukshma buddhi, subtle intellect, with which you distinguish between the permanent and the impermanent. You distinguish between the world and that which is beyond the world. The problem is this ability has not been developed at all. Intellect itself is not developed. Subtle intellect, 0. Therefore, the moment, if you know what's happening, the moment the verses get a little technical, a little serious, a little heavy, I get SMSs. Today was very technical. Today was very heavy. Because it's not that the verses are heavy, it's because our subtle intellect has not been developed. It's heavily laden with mind and sense, the pull of the mind and the senses. Whereas you look at children, what a capacity they have to absorb knowledge. Anything. You think that you as an adult have a greater capacity. The power of concentration that a child has, if it is developed, the power of penetration that a child has is enormous. That is why they say this knowledge should be taught along with everything else, so that effortlessly the child grows into a whole personality, not H-O-L-E, but W-H-O-L-E. Without this knowledge, you become incapable of any focused thinking, incapable of handling yourself, incapable of certainly handling the world. And so therefore, this knowledge needs to be tapped. And with the subtle intellect, you develop this capacity to distinguish between the permanent and the impermanent. It's called Nitya, Anitya, Viveka, Vichara. Why is it that you need to develop this capability? Because you see, what happens is, a dull-witted person, if your intellect is not developed, you go by what is obvious, you go by what is seen, and therefore you think, I am the body. All of us are like that, the dull-witted. Manda, they say. Manda means slow. You think you are the body, but the problem with this is, the body is extremely vulnerable to the influences of the world. And therefore, when the world affects the body, you get affected. You get traumatized. A learned person, a person who shifted his focus of attention from the body to the mind and intellect, is less affected because at least temporarily he is relieved from the fluctuations at the physical level. For instance, an emotional personality, let's say an artist or a musician or a writer, a poet, who's risen above the physical body, or a scientist for that matter, the fluctuations that take place at the physical level don't bother them. An artist will paint for hours together without feeling the strain. A musician will sing and sit down and sing for hours together without feeling the fluctuations in his body. A scientist will work for hours together without feeling the pangs of hunger. So, to some extent, you get freedom when you move away from the body and identify with the mind and intellect. But the real freedom you get, the real insulation you get, when you shift, a Mahatma is one, as we go along, he speaks of that. Some Mahatmas, such a Mahatma is very difficult to get. So, a Mahatma is one who has shifted his attention from the body, mind and intellect to Brahman, to Atman, to the spirit within you. And that spirit is untouched by the world. We have to get back to the immortal examples. You see, you can't understand these principles unless you go back to examples. So let's take the example which we've repeated often enough. But we still do. Why are we repeating it again? Because we haven't got it yet. So what is that example? When you take a horseshoe magnet and you bring an iron piece towards that horseshoe magnet, what happens? The iron piece is attracted by the magnet, it's influenced by the magnet, it is subservient to the magnet. You take away the iron piece and you bring a piece of wood to the magnet. What happens? Nothing happens. The magnet does not have the power to influence or affect the wood. Now you do something interesting, which is you tie the iron piece to the wooden piece and bring the combination to the magnet, what happens? It's attracted, it's influenced, it becomes subservient, a slave to the magnet. But you and I know that even when the combination is attracted by the magnet, the wooden piece in the combination is still immaculate, untouched. You and I are like that. You and I are like this combination of iron and wood, are like combination of iron and wood. And the world is this powerful magnet. The body, mind and intellect are like the iron piece. They are affected by the world, influenced by the world, traumatized by the world. And so the world which is full of pairs of opposites and the world which is constantly changing will impact your body, mind and intellect. So the body, mind and intellect is subjected to the torturous changes that go on in the world. And you get affected. You are not the body, mind and intellect. You are Atman. But you get affected by the changes. Why? Because of your unintelligent bondage with, unintelligent association with, unintelligent constant thinking of the body, mind and intellect. So the problem is not with the world. The problem is with your own unintelligent association and identification. Once you release that, what happens? The changes go on in the world, they affect the body, mind and intellect, but you are insulated from this. And therefore, your experience of the world completely changes. What happens? You then have the ability to enjoy both the ups and the downs of life. And that was Krishna's life. Krishna he didn't have a life that was smooth sailing. Right from the moment he was born, he went through all kinds of challenges. I'm sure the worst placed among us haven't gone through even 10% of the challenges that Krishna went through. And yet, the difference was, he sailed through life with a smile on his face. He was ever cheerful, ever enthusiastic, always full of mischief and happiness. Whereas you and I, you should ask someone to film you from morning till evening one day. And watch yourself on film, you'll feel the most depressed because from the time you wake up, you're pulling a long face as if the world is about to come to an end. Why? Because of this wrong identification. So the Gita, Vedanta gives us a way out of this. The Gita says, don't change anything about the way, your circumstances, your vocation, the kind of things that you're doing, your relationships, nothing. Everything remains the same. There's only one thing that you do, which is these pairs of opposites that are going on in the world and your experiences with the body, mind and intellect, you trace it back to its very source. And when you trace it back to the source, you find there is one source, there is one enlivening principle that facilitates all your experiences. So whatever you see, hear, taste, smell, touch, whatever emotions you feel, good, bad, indifferent, whatever thoughts that you conceive in your mind, all of them are traced to that one spirit. This is the teaching that is given in the Kenopanishad. In the Kenopanishad, the student goes to the teacher and asks a very technical question. I'm not going to repeat that question because again I'll get an SMS. Today was very technical. But the answer that the Guru gives the student is what is relevant to us today. And he says, Shrotrasya shrotram manaso mano yad vacho havachagum pranasya pranaha chakshushaschakshurati muccha dhira pretyasma lokadamruta bhavanti. This may sound like Greek and Latin to you, but Very simple. What he's saying is, Shrotrasya Shrotram. It is the ear of the ear. Meaning, ear. Hearing. Eye of the eye, prana of the prana, mind of the mind, etc., etc. What he means is, see, when you hear, you may hear pleasant sound, you may hear unpleasant sound. You may hear flattery, you may hear somebody tearing you to bits. If your focus is on what I'm hearing, then you go through this roller coaster ride. Sometimes your boss is nice to you, sometimes you get a real verbal lashing. So this goes on. If your focus is on what I hear, then you suffer. But as without making any change, without attempting to change what you hear, when you hear, if your focus shifts to that power that enables me to hear, then what happens? You're in a state of constant exhilaration, constant inspiration, irrespective of what you're hearing. Without going into the rest of the verse, this by itself comes in so handy. Because constantly you hear people complaining. A lady comes and says, I'm miserable. Why? Because my husband is constantly shouting and screaming. Sometimes a man comes, a gentleman comes, he says the same thing about the wife. An employee comes and complains about the employer, the boss. This goes on and on and on. Sometimes there are people who come and complain about the neighbor. I've got a terrible neighbor who's constantly picking on me. The solution to this is just shift your attention from what you're hearing to that which enables you to hear. And then what happens is, not only are you not affected by the screaming and the verbal lashing that you get, but the greater the screaming, the greater is the reminder of Atman to you, and you enjoy your experiences right through life. This applies to everything, whether you're hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling emotions, or thinking thoughts. This is the insulation that you get. Unless you develop this insulation, how will you you become so vulnerable, you become so fragile, you become so dependent on the world. And then you do what modern science and technologists have been doing, scientists and technologists, you try and re-engineer the world. You try and get the world to a state which suits you. But the problem with this is, you can't change the nature of the world. Yes, you might succeed in getting the world to fit your mental pattern today. But that is still fragile, because the world changes, your mind changes. Even if your mind is steady, the world changes. If you manage to get the world steady, your mind changes. So in this scenario, it is impossible to get a fix, a steady match. So therefore, this way is much better. You trace back all your experiences to the very source, and then you are completely independent of the world. Totally independent. How do you pursue this? How do you go about this? There are two basic approaches in life. They say one is pravritti, the other is nivritti. Pravritti is where you're pursuing the world. All that enhances, increases, enriches the I and mine, my personality, is pravritti. So you go out into the world to acquire things, to grab things from the world and heap it upon yourself, and then you feel a sense of relief. This is pravritti. But the problem with pravritti is, as you keep acquiring, the more you acquire, the less you enjoy, because the law of diminishing returns functions. And as we said, since there is the wealth, the power, the name and fame, and then you learn to fix the world, you acquire this art of, you become a power broker and all kinds of things. But still within yourself, you are sorrowful. This is Narada's condition. Whereas, if you shift your attention from pravritti to nivritti, nivritti is where you're poised for this mighty spiritual